Hello everybody and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hoping well, and today we're doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw The Marvels, as it says right here from Tony over at Deadline, melts down. And I think that that is an understatement of just how poor the opening is for this brand new film, The Marvels, which is also one of the worst of the Marvel films that has ever been released. It's definitely not the worst out there. I think that there's an argument to be made that maybe Thor: Love and Thunder has that, maybe has that prize. And of course, there's a plethora of others. I never actually saw Eternals, and so I don't really have the wherewithal to say whether that film might be worse. But I can say The Marvels was definitely not a good film, and turns out seems that everyone else is kind of in the same boat. At the very least, people have no real interest in this property. So I think this news is very important for several reasons, because I think that, one, it does away with any of the mindset, any of the thoughts that existed back in 2019 when the first Captain Marvel film came out, where everyone was trying to argue that somehow it was because the movie was so good, or because somehow Captain Marvel as a character was something that people had been dying for, right? And that's why it got to be a billion-dollar film. I think that this completely destroys that narrative and shows us that Brie Larson is definitely not a box office draw, and also kind of reiterates something that we've known for a very long time, which is that the movie star really is not as prominent as it used to be, right? Back in the day, a movie star was in a movie, you could sell a crap ton of tickets because they were actually in the film. Nowadays, people really honestly do not care all that much about it. So $47 million domestic opening, and as you can see, the lowest box office opening. And here's the fun part about all of it. That's without adjusting for inflation. That's right. I'm already triggering people because I'm talking about inflation, but the fact that this film is the lowest on record, coming in well underneath the $55 million made by The Incredible Hulk back in 2008, that tells you quite a bit about just how poorly this film did. Not to mention the international numbers, which is also, according to Nance, good old Nance over at Deadline, 110 million global opening is the lowest ever also for the Disney MCU offshore and worldwide. So this film is setting records in all the best way, and it goes to show you, hey, yeah, if you make a bunch of films within a short amount of time, and you don't actually give fans what they want because instead you're deciding to push various aspects of identity politics and other nonsense in it, guess what? People are going to stop going to your movies, and I think that there's a plethora of reasons as to why this film is failing. Amidst those are just a few examples. Before we go any further, please make sure you smash that like button, a lot of the fire button, also smash the rumble button as well, and also make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with that bell notification on. That way every time a video or live stream goes live on the channel. So as you can see, indeed, over at Deadline, $110 million global start. This is the worst opening ever for the MCU. It goes on to say here, as we expected yesterday, and again, this was something that we're finally starting to come to grips with as we got closer to the release date, it came in with the lowest start ever for a Disney MCU title worldwide and internationally. The $110 million global launch estimates $63 million from the international box office in 51 markets, $47 million from the domestic. So keep in mind that that's still a lot of markets that this film is opening up in, which means there are not really a whole lot of other countries that are going to be able to come to the rescue of this film, not like they really would be coming to the rescue of the film anyway. There's some not so bad news, and The Marvels opened number one in all material markets outside of local fare. So again, local films beat the movie. China, as expected, came in really low. It's curious that there is still no Maoan audience score, but the Dubin critics' thrashing is clearly not helping. Nevertheless, the market was tops for the Marvels. And so I think that this, again, the continued spin from mainstream media outlets when they try to argue and say, well, there's some good news. No, just because your film is number one, when in all honesty, if it was not coming in at number one, the fact that it's actually losing to some local films in some of these markets is actually even worse than that, because it makes sense for local films to do better, but at the same time, when you have a massive international brand like the MCU, like Disney, that is not the kind of thing that you want to see. So the fact that the only good thing is something that should have been a given, because it's a new movie, and any new movie with that type of international reach should be able to, at the very least, reach number one, says quite a bit. In IMAX, The Marvels grossed $10 million global, including $3.6 million from offshore. So about $7 million coming from IMAX, telling me no one's going to see this film. And also, no one's going to see this film in IMAX either. Going over to Tony, again, $47 million makes this the lowest opening domestically. So the lowest opening in the entire MCU in every single market, in every single way, right? This is just a complete and utter catastrophe. It says the film is posting a 3-day at the bottom of yesterday's estimates with $47 million, the lowest ever MCU Disney title. Don't blame the running time, as Marvel's clocks in at 97 minutes versus other MCU titles, which have run 2.5 hours. The Marvel Saturday was 15.3. 30% against its previews of 21.5, which, by the way, according to an article over at Variety, I believe it was, 21.5 would make it the second lowest opening day for a Marvel film. What's interesting is that the film that was the actual lowest day, for the entire history of the MCU, ended up being a movie that actually, if you adjusted for inflation, or at the very least compared ticket prices and the number of tickets probably sold, it would still end up being the worst. And so on paper, MCU Marvels is the worst film of all time as far as the box office is concerned. And so, yeah, a lot of very, very exciting stuff going on right now. It's not often that we have a lot of stuff to talk about with the box office, especially because of the strike and everything going around it. It's going to be interesting to see just how many times they try to blame. I know that Tony was mentioning this in his articles going up to this, that, well, the writer strike and the actor strike rather just ended. And so they were only able to do minimal promotion, and so it may have some impact. Well, the fact that they had even just a few days to promote this movie and the film still came in at the bottom end of their estimates tells me that, yeah, that promotion doesn't do anything. All right, that promotion, that going on late night shows, that does not really move the needle anymore. All right, there's just no evidence to really suggest that. What will be, I think, the key to kind of understanding this is actually going to be looking ahead towards a film like the Hunger Games prequel coming out soon, because that film will have had at least a couple of weeks worth, or at least a full week worth of promotional materials. Obviously, them being allowed to do that with the deals going through in this way to some extent. And so the question is, how much more money will it make opening weekend versus the estimates? And if it comes in at the same level as this, where it's coming in well below bottom of the estimate charts, that tells you all you need to know about just how much impact that has. And anytime people like Tony at Deadline try to bring it up, you can say, yeah, that's not true. That makes really no difference whatsoever. Might move the needle, right, at most maybe $1 million or $2 million. But that's being very generous, I think, based on the numbers that we're seeing for the Marvels. But as you can see, Marvels came in still at the number one spot. So yeah, got some good news, right? Right? According to Deadline, the Marvels coming at $47 million, $11,000 per screen, which, again, for a film opening up is fine, but when you compare that to other films coming out more recently, it is definitely not looking great. Five Nights at Freddy's is also still hanging around at 3 weeks out, still making $9 million, so even though we are still seeing pretty consistent drop-offs, this film is still available on Peacock, and we keep getting reminded about how that's usually a death knell for movies, but hey, turns out when you spend very little on a movie, because you have a controlled budget, and then you give fans of a property what they want, turns out you can turn quite a bit of profit, which is what exactly Universal is doing with Five Nights at Freddy's. The Taylor Swift Eras Tour is still hanging around for some reason. I know there's a lot of Swifties out there, and they're crazy for this movie, but I can't wait to see this film just drop off the charts completely. Priscilla, the number 4 spot, $4.7 million. So again, 3 weeks out, this film only dropping 5%, adding another 1,000 screens. So that's pretty good. That all being said, because it's A24, we really won't know the profitability of the film until the end of the actual run, because A24 has a very weird release schedule. And rounding off the top 5, we have Killers of the Flower Moon, a Scorsese film that I still have not seen because it's a 3.5-hour movie, and I got kids, just no capacity to go out of my house for 3.5 hours at any given point, especially with one being just a little over a month old. We have Killers of the Flower Moon dropping 32% to another $4.6 million. This film still, again, the drops are not bad. The drops are, I think, for a 3.5-hour film, doing okay. The big problem is that this film cost $200 million. Now, I know that you got some pretty funny videos coming out and some pretty funny comments being made. I think it was Tony the other day who I called out on social media because he was basically going off about, why Killers of the Flower Moon opening this way and doing this amount of money is actually a good thing, right? When this movie first came out, all of the narrative was, oh, impressive numbers, this impressive opening, when it's like, look, compare that $200 million budget. No, it's really not that impressive. Not to mention, it's just not making a whole lot of money in comparison to just how many people are in that film, the kind of film that it is. It should be doing a lot better, but it's not. And so the argument trying to be, well, it's being made by Apple TV, and so all they care about is driving people to their streaming service, and not so much about the box office, and so therefore it is good for them, and for the Marvels it's not good. It's like, no, they're bad, right? Both Marvels and Killers of the Flower Moon are going to lose hundreds of millions of dollars, and it's not good for either of them. In fact, Killers of the Flower Moon right now is probably pacing worldwide, maybe even to end somewhere north of where the Marvels ends up. Now, that's still too early to tell, but it will be interesting to see what that week 2 drop-off is, especially since there is going to be competition from another female-led movie next week with the Hunger Games prequel. Going into the individual numbers themselves for each individual film, we have the Marvels. Interesting that poster is pretty much already being designed as like the Blu-ray 4K, so it's almost as if they're like, yeah, we're going to try to get this thing out of theaters as quick as possible so that we can just throw it onto Disney+, throw it onto Blu-ray and DVD, try and get some sales that way, because $110 million. Now, going into the weekend, remember, the early projections were it was going to get domestically $75 million, that it was going to make upwards of 140 plus million internationally, came in well beneath that. Most of that coming obviously from them very much over projecting the domestic estimates, but also not doing nearly as well internationally as they had originally thought either. But $110 million means this film is in a lot of trouble financially. Five Nights at Freddy's is not in trouble financially. In fact, it's doing incredibly well against a $20 million budget, $251 million. And again, you'll notice that historically, this film is actually well below the average, right? Well below the historical standard. But it's because this film costs so little that this is still a huge win for them. As you can see, compared to, it actually does not have its budget listed, but I have that in my own chart. I think it's about 9 or 10 times its budget, if not more. But we'll get into that in just a second. Taylor Swift at $240 million. Again, this is just adding to the profits for the Swifts and also for AMC. Priscilla, this new film from Sofia Coppola, this is $12.7 million, and again, it's an A24, so we won't really know exactly how much money this made or lost until the end of its run, most likely. And then Killers of the Flower Moon, again, a lot of star power in this movie, and it doesn't make any difference. It doesn't make much of a difference at all. It's kind of just amazing to see how much of a difference release time and also just general social media presence can make in a movie, right? If you think back to the summer, right? Oppenheimer getting $900 million worldwide, that's insane. That honestly is. I think we kind of lost that because of the whole Barbenheimer effect, but just how well that film did is just really insane when you think about it historically, of how that just really did not make a whole lot of sense. I mean, don't get me wrong, I did like the movie, but it was definitely not a great film. To me, it was just a B-level movie from Christopher Nolan. But that all being said, it's just amazing how well that film did. And it had, again, people in the film, as far as star power is concerned, who were maybe a couple of them maybe at the same level as Leo, but I don't really think anyone necessarily can be at that same level, and it's still not making much of a difference. Again, you got big names, Leonardo DiCaprio, Robert De Niro, and of course, Lee Gladstone, who's not going to be moving the needle all that much for audiences in general, but still, those two names, Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro, amongst the other cast in the film, should have made this film bigger. But again, I think this is helping show us why these people don't matter anymore, right? And also kind of going back to what I was saying in the very beginning, which is the reason why when Tony goes off talking about how, they didn't have time to promote this movie, why that just does not make a difference, right? Promotions of the premiere events, things like that, just does not drive a whole lot of box office ticket sales these days. So let's go ahead and go to the chart. We love doing charting here over at OMB Reviews. With that $110 million opening for the Marvels, that means the movie right now is about $263 million in the red. Now remember, the money that we've been told about so far was that it cost roughly $250 to $270 million, and then they got a tax credit, which made the actual cost around $220. So on a $220 million budget based on what's been reported so far. Now, I know that people like Valiant Renegade and others who've been following this stuff think that by next year, when we get the full tax releases, right? When we get the full releases of the information, all the data dumps by most likely by next year, that he suspects that the film's budget probably ends up being a little bit higher than that $220 million. Either way, even if it is just $220, that's still a lot of money to make up, and you've only made 0.5 times your budget after your opening weekend. And normally, this is when a lot of Marvel films make the most of it. Remember, Marvel films are notorious for having massive openings and then having massive drop-offs. So the fact that this film had a very low opening, is there still going to be the massive drop-off, right? Because typically you have fans who want to go see the film first thing, don't want to have anything spoiler-wise with them. So if we still see a 60 to 70% drop, which is the standard for most MCU fare, oh boy, if this film was in trouble before, it could be in even more trouble if that is the case. It is the second weekend, or technically the third for Priscilla, but because of this being really the only second weekend it's had a wide release, right now it's at around $12.7 million, about $22 million in the red, but as I said, this is a film that could definitely make its money back because of just how A24 releases tend to work. After Death, we don't know the budget on this movie yet, so again, I think that the profitability of this film is probably already there, if not already. That was just assuming some type of budget around maybe $3 to $5 million. But again, I do think the film probably has made money. Five Nights at Freddy's over $100 million in net gain profit. So even though its first 2 weeks account for the vast majority of its release, right, 86% of all that it's made was made in the first 2 weeks of release. Again, that makes a lot of sense as to just the audience that went out to go and see it. The fact that it is available on Peacock as well. Still, 12.6 times its budget. That's how you make money, not when you just have the 0.5 like the Marvels does. Kills of the Flower Moon has only made 0.6 times its budget. So even though it's at $126 million, and even though it's been having some pretty consistent drop-offs, again, look at that number. It's a chart breaker, right? It is a chart breaker in the positive direction, meaning that it has made well more than what most films make historically compared to the first 2 weeks. The fact, though, is that this film still costs way too much money, and it's still just not making nearly enough as it would need to actually hit a break-even point. And I would say that that's pretty much out of reach completely for this film at this point of its release. There's some other numbers on here if you want to double check any of those other films, but I did want to also point your eyes to this, which is, again, just to kind of showcase here how poor this is as far as a release from the Marvels. And again, this is something I've been talking about during my live show. I talked about it during, FNT when I could, and other streams that I've been on. But just go ahead and compare, right? So up to this point, one of the lowest openings in the entire MCU was The Incredible Hulk in 2008, right? This is back during the Paramount days, before, you had the actual takeover and acquisition by Disney. Now, that film made about $55 million unadjusted in its opening weekend. When you adjust that for inflation, you're looking at it being closer to about $80 million in today's dollars. But if for any reason you just don't like that, you just don't like how I adjust for inflation, you think it's not fair, okay. 55 million then unadjusted is still higher than 47 million. So The Incredible Hulk had more people go out in its opening weekend domestically than the Marvels did. Just to give you an idea of that too, with tickets, right? Maybe people are not going to be nearly as crazy when I talk about ticket sales. Roughly estimating using the average ticket price at that time was around $7.18. You take that same number, 55 million, divided by 718. Obviously, I had these numbers just for inflation, but then it's still going to cancel itself out, so it's going to be the same number in the end. That's roughly 7.7 million tickets in its opening weekend. Thor, 2011, again, also not the biggest of openings either, 8.2 million tickets. Ant-Man from 2015, also seen as one of the lower end openings. That opened to 57 million in its unadjusted numbers, right? So right there with Incredible Hulk, that's still 6.7 million tickets, with the average ticket price at that time being $8.43. Captain Marvel, obviously this film had a big opening, right? 185 million adjusted, 16.7 million tickets. But remember, I think this is showing us very clearly that Captain Marvel did not sell tickets because of Brie Larson, did not sell tickets because of Carol Danvers or anything else associated with it, but rather because of the fact it was a month before Endgame, and it was promoted as a film you had to see to be able to fully understand and appreciate Endgame, right? That was at the peak of the MCU. That's when people were starting to get very, very hyped, right? The pre-sales were already going for Endgame, so you had a lot of cross-promotion going on saying, hey, before you see Endgame, go see this movie. So that is the reason why ultimately the film did as well as it did, making well over $1 billion, in fact, by the end of its run. But we now know it had nothing to do with Carol Danvers, had nothing to do with Brie Larson, had nothing to do with any of those things, because if that was the case, you would not see, not just lower than some other films, the lowest by far. We're looking at this film selling half of what Ant-Man 2015 did in its opening weekend ticket sale, 3.6 million versus 6.7 million. This is not just the lowest in the MCU. This is the lowest by far in the MCU, right? Using the unadjusted numbers, 47 versus 55 doesn't seem like all that much, but 3.6 million tickets versus 7.7 million tickets, or 47 million versus 80 million, yeah, there's a bit of a difference there. There's a much bigger difference when you look at those numbers. And so just to give you a bit of just to quantify this for anyone who might still be kind of scratching their heads or may not fully understand, when we say the Marvels is the flop, when we say that the Marvels is the worst ever opening in the MCU, we mean that not only because it is a fact, but we mean that in the way that this is, I think, one of these death knell signs for the MCU going forward, right? This was the last real major MCU project they had going on, right? They had Loki Season 2 going on behind the paywall of Disney Plus. That also has something to play with this, right? You have two characters in this movie that you would have had to done the homework on. You would have had to go and see the series for. So that's going to definitely turn off some people from wanting to go and see it. But I think also you have to just take into account the fact that this movie is just not moving the needle because it's just not good. The character of Carol Danvers has been failed in the comics. They've had to reboot her character several times because no one wants it. Turns out, no one wants her in the movies either. So yeah, congratulations, Captain Marvel 2019. You were a huge fluke. Now the truth is coming out, and now we know the fact that no one cares about you, no one wants to go and see you, and clearly your marketing did not work or was not effective in any way. But those are the numbers as they stand. What are y'all's thoughts? How much money do you think the Marvels are going to lose? Based on how it's tracking right now and based on the numbers that we have available to us, it seems likely that the film will be somewhere in that $200 million range. So it could be one of the biggest box office flops of the year based on the budget that we know about right now. I think the Flashes might just be a little bit higher. And so, and of course, Dial of Destiny 2 might even be even worse. But this is really, really bad. So I'd love to know your thoughts about that. Just to give y'all some comparisons for opening weekends. The Marvels opened up to 110. Five Nights at Freddy's opened to 130. That's right. Five Nights at Freddy's had a higher opening weekend. Taylor Swift had a higher opening weekend. Let's see. 110 is the standard there. The Meg 2 from the summer had a bigger opening weekend. Barbie, of course. Oppenheimer had a bigger one. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 had one. Let's see. Indiana Jones Dial of Destiny actually even had $19 million more than where the Marvels was. The Flash had $130 million. So this coming in $20 million underneath the Flash. So you all remember how big of a bust that movie was? That film only got to $210 million by its second weekend and ended up just, again, completely crapping out, I think, even well before it got to $300 million. And so we're probably going to see something similar if these numbers hold. Well below Transformers Rise of the Beast, well below Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Not surprised there. Little Mermaid, $50 million or so less than that. $700 million underneath Fast 10. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, quite a bit below that. Again, I'm just trying to give y'all some references here. Super Mario Brothers, well below that, 200 plus million below that. John Wick Chapter 4. I love John Wick Chapter 4, but if you were going to tell me John Wick Chapter 4 would make more in its international opening than a MCU film just a few years ago, I would have probably laughed in your face. It even made 100 plus million less than Ant-Man the Wasp Quantumania. So especially when you look at the other MCU films and DC films and major studio Hollywood superhero movies and how big of a flops those movies were, and then you come into this movie, The Marvels, and this film is significantly less in its opening, oh boy, get ready to see a major, major dumpster fire if you have not already. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you like this video, smash that like button. A lot of fun about IC, smash the rumble button as well. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a special shout out to all of my Chosen of Valhalla members for the month of November, starting off with Father Luca Illich, Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel, the name Eagle Rider. Miss Martin Muses, check out her YouTube channel by the same name. Matt317, check out his Twitch channel. Laura, the Mother Major General Story, sorry, didn't have enough spirit fingers there. Mr. Roy and ZK-Man, who can check out over at xtheboundaries.co. If you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, check out the top link in the video description below. You get access to things like the giveaways channel, a podcast that I try to do every single month with a bunch of other awesome YouTubers, and a plethora of other content. So go ahead and check that out if you want more. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.